This video contains descriptions of real historical events, including violence and disturbing subject matter. All content is presented for educational purposes based on verified public records. Viewer discretion is advised. In 1957, a young boy was found dead inside a cardboard box left in the woods at the edge of Philadelphia. He had been bathed. His hair had been recently cut, and he was so thin that he had clearly been suffering for a long time. No one came forward. No parent. No relative. No one reported him missing. For 65 years, he had no name. So who was the boy in the box, and how does a child vanish so completely that no one even notices he is gone? It was late February 1957, in a quiet wooded area called Fox Chase, on the northeastern edge of Philadelphia. A young man was driving past a stretch of overgrown land used as an unofficial dumping ground. He had stopped there, the story goes, for reasons of his own, and through the brush, he noticed a large cardboard box. He looked inside. Wrapped in a cheap flannel blanket was the body of a small boy, perhaps 4 to 6 years old. The man was frightened and unsure what to do, and at first he told no one. It was only days later that the police were finally informed, and officers arrived at the scene. The box itself was ordinary. It had once held a baby's bassinet, sold by a well-known department store chain. The blanket was worn and had been recently laundered. The boy was naked, clean, and carefully wrapped. Everything about the scene spoke of contradiction. The child had been neglected and harmed over a long period, his small body bearing the marks of sustained mistreatment and severe malnourishment. And yet, in death, someone had bathed him, cut his hair, wrapped him in a blanket, and placed him in a box, as though some part of them still cared or wanted it to look that way. The police took his fingerprints. They photographed his face. They were certain that a child this young, this recently alive, would be identified within days. Someone, somewhere, had to be missing him. They were wrong. And the silence that followed would last for the rest of the century, and beyond. The Philadelphia police launched an enormous effort to identify the boy. His photograph was printed in newspapers across the city and the region. It was placed on posters and even printed on flyers sent out with electricity bills to 600,000 homes. His small, solemn face looked out from shop windows and notice boards all over Philadelphia. And no one knew him. It is difficult to overstate how strange this is. A child of 4, 5, or 6 does not exist in isolation. Such a child has usually been seen by neighbors, by doctors, by shopkeepers, by other children. And yet not a single person came forward to say they recognized him. No school reported an empty desk. No relative called. It was as though he had been kept hidden from the world his entire short life. The investigators of the 1950s did everything their era allowed. They traced the bassinet box to a batch sold by the department store, but the boxes had been sold for cash, untracked. They examined the blanket. They followed the few faint leads they had. A homicide detective named Remington Bristow became so consumed by the case that he worked it for the rest of his life, long after he retired, chasing theory after theory until his death. Theories accumulated over the decades. One pointed to a foster home not far from where the body was found, and a woman connected to it. Another, emerging much later, came from a woman who claimed her abusive mother had purchased the boy and kept him hidden, mistreating him for years before his death. Her account was detailed and disturbing, but it could never be corroborated, and investigators were divided on whether to believe it. The one thing everyone agreed on was the central, unbearable fact of the case. A child had lived and suffered and died, and the world had no record that he had ever existed at all. In 1998, the case was reopened by a new generation of investigators. The boy was exhumed. A DNA sample was carefully extracted from his remains. At the time, the technology could do little with it, but they preserved it, and they waited, hoping the science would one day catch up to the question. The people of Philadelphia did not let him go. Investigators, retired and serving, paid for a proper headstone. They gave him the only name they could: America's Unknown Child. For decades, on the anniversary of his discovery, people who had never known him came to lay flowers on the grave of a boy with no name. But a grave with no name is a question that does not close. And by the second decade of the new century, a new kind of science was beginning to crack open cold cases that had been frozen for generations. The same technology that was identifying long-dead killers could also be turned to the dead who had no name. A team of investigators and forensic genealogists took the DNA that had waited since 1998, and they began to build outward from it. Cousins, grandparents, a family tree growing from a single child at its center. The answer they reached, after 65 years, was a name. In December 2022, the Philadelphia police held a press conference. After 65 years, they were finally able to say his name. The boy in the box was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He had been born in 1953. He had a birth certificate. He had a family. For the first time in the lives of everyone who had worked the case, the child had an identity. But a name is not the same as an answer. The police were careful to say that identifying Joseph was not the end of the investigation. It was, in a sense, the beginning of a new one. They now knew who he was. They knew the names of people connected to him. But the central questions, how exactly he died and at whose hands, remained, and the authorities indicated that out of respect for living people and the ongoing case, certain details would not be released. What the identification revealed was its own kind of tragedy. Here was a child who had been born into records, into a system, into a family, and who had then been so completely erased from it that for 65 years, no one connected to him ever came forward. Someone knew. Someone had always known. And they had said nothing for the entire span of a human lifetime. The headstone in the Philadelphia cemetery has now been changed. For decades it read, America's Unknown Child. It now carries the name Joseph Augustus Zarelli and the dates of a life that lasted only a few years. The people who visited him when he had no name still visit him now that he has one. In a strange way, the boy who was claimed by no one was, in the end, claimed by an entire city. It does not undo what was done to him. Nothing can. But a child who lived his whole short life in hiding is, at last, no longer hidden. He has a name carved in stone and a place that is unmistakably his. A small boy was left in a box at the edge of a city, wrapped with a strange and terrible care. For 65 years, the world did not know his name. Strangers gave him a grave and flowers and a place to belong, when his own family would not. Now we know he was called Joseph. What we still do not know is why no one ever came to look for him. If you want to go deeper, the story of the Sauter children is waiting for you.